Hi, I'm supernatural thriller author J.F. Penn, and you're listening to GenreTainment.
Hi everyone, welcome to GenreTainment. If you happen to be new to the show, GenreTainment is part of the Sci-Fi Pulse Radio.com network. And we're your hosts, Marx.
And Julie.
I'm the author of the book Television on the Wild Wild Web, script writer, filmmaker, and part-time ninja.
And I am a writer, actress, and I think all-around GenreTainment class clown. And this is GenreTainment. This is where we talk about what's happening in the world of film, TV, books, and web series. And we give you interviews with writers, directors, producers, and actors in both independent and not-so-independent creations.
This is episode 126, and our guest this time is author Jeffery H. Haskell. He is the author of a fun superhero novel series I've been reading called Full Metal Superhero.
Well, Jeffrey tells us about his popular superhero series, the meaning behind the name of the series and the lead character, the research he did on the science behind the superhero, doing research to write a character that can't walk, his experiences writing for Kindle Worlds, and more. We also chat with him about what we all think makes a superhero story.
Before we start the interview, we should mention that the music you hear at the start and end of the show is from our friend T. Sean Hardy, who composed this theme song for our web series Reality on Demand. Now let's get started with the interview. It's great to have you on the show. I've been really enjoying your Full Metal Superhero series. Why am I going to explain it for you? Can explain it. What's that show? What's that series about?
Well, first, I'd love it if it was a show. Please. I'm open to that.
From our lips to God's ears.
Maybe I'm just prophetically saying
that. The Full Metal Superhero it's not the first book I wrote. It's chronologically, it's like the fifth. I wrote a trilogy a couple years ago under a pen name that got picked up by Kindle Scout, and I wrote a couple of novellas, and then I wrote a science fiction book that is actually going to come out probably in May, and then I wrote Arsenal, which is the first book in the Full Metal Superhero series. And when I first wrote it, it was really just I love superheroes, right? My first attempt at a real novel was a superhero novel, and it didn't pan out too well. But I learned a lot in between 2011 and 2016 when I wrote Arsenal, and so I put all that into play, and I did 2 or 3 drafts. The first draft I think I wrote in 9 days. That's how excited I was to write that book. And it's 62,000 words, I think, is what it ended up being. And I think the full, beginning to end, I think I probably spent 15 days of actual writing. The story just came out of me. It was clearly something I wanted to say and do.
Well, that's cool when that happens.
Yes.
So, the main character, Arsenal, she's a little different. She's sort of like Iron Man in some ways, but she's very different otherwise. How'd you come up with that character?
Amelia Lockhart is her name, and
I love that name.
Thank you. There's nothing accidental about the names in my books. There's a scientific study that happened a couple of years ago that found that people with A names are more popular than people with B names. And the further you get away from A, the less popular you are.
That explains a lot of high school.
That's why people are so biased to Zartan on G.I. Joe, She's misunderstood.
You misunderstood mass murderer. I know, I get it. Who love gold, right?
No, yeah.
Where's the gold,
who
Cobra Commander? Really? Right? I'm wearing my G.I. Joe hoodie right now. If you saw it on video, you'd know.
Awesome.
I saw it at Walmart for $10
J
tonight.
Fan, so.
Oh, I love Lady J, yeah.
Lady J and Flint, I love those two.
Mm-hmm.
Scarlet and Snake Eyes were my couple.
Oh, I was a Lady J and Flint shipper.
So Amelia Lockhart is, I named her because of Amelia Earhart.
Yes, and that's what I was hoping.
I grew up wanting to be a pilot, among other things, and an explorer, and, Star Trek was a huge influence on me, Captain Kirk, and going into the unknown. And Amelia Earhart kind of represented all of that when I was a kid. Obviously, she was dead long before I was born, but just the idea of her and what she did and what she accomplished with, a piece of paper and a pencil, and some cardboard and an engine just, blew me away. So she was an inventor. She was an explorer. She was an adventurer. And that's what Amelia Lockhart is. She's an inventor, adventurer, and explorer.
I hate to digress, but have you seen the did you see in the news about how they now think that the remains that were discovered just a few years after she disappeared and were actually thrown away and discarded, dismissed as had to have been a European man, now they think were actually Amelia Earhart's on this atoll. It was, her and her navigator, and they dismissed it because they thought it was too tall and this and that, but she was taller than the average woman at the time. She's like 5'7". And
I was disappointed to hear that too. Yeah.
So it's like, what do you mean? First, I was shocked. I was like, what do you mean discarded them? Like threw them away? They didn't bury them. I mean, even though it wasn't a famous person, it's still a person. I was kind of surprised at that.
Well, but we'll see. There's not, who knows?
Yeah, but in all fairness to the guy, it's not like, they had the know-how about, learning he had limited knowledge at the time, So.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the fact that they found him at all was pretty cool.
Yeah, totally accidental, actually.
I still believe Star Trek Voyager. She was abducted by aliens, and they'll find her in the future.
I keep hoping for that.
I always hoped she was just still in the Bermuda Triangle and pop out, and it would only have been like a day for her, or something.
I kind of wish that with a lot of people. Have some great people come back to life and help us out.
Yeah.
But so Amelia Lockhart is very much, historically speaking, she's Amelia Earhart, she's Howard Hughes, she's all these different characters who were inventors and adventurers, and she's an engineer, obviously, as well. And then the name Arsenal came about because I was trying to come up with a cool name that wasn't necessarily taken. With 70, 80 years of DC and Marvel comic books, it's hard to find a superhero name that isn't been used.
Yeah.
And Arsenal has been used, but it's by a really lesser-known character that nobody likes. So it worked out. And then Full Metal Superhero is because I read an article. I read a lot, by the way. I read an article a couple of years back by Terry Elliott and Ted Rosio. Gosh, I hope I didn't back up their names. Sometimes I do that. Is it Ted Elliott and Terry Rosio, the guys who wrote Pirates of the Caribbean?
Uh-huh.
He was talking about it was Terry, and he was talking about, because we're on a first name basis, not really.
Yeah.
But he was talking about mental real estate, about how when you are writing something, the less you have to do to get people to associate your idea with something else, the better. So I don't particularly like anime a whole lot, but I understand and realize it's popular. And so one of the most popular animes that all my friends who do like anime are always talking about is Full Metal Alchemist.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I chose Full Metal Superhero to sort of, when people would see it, they'd be like, oh, hey, that looks familiar. I want to try that out subconsciously, so that's where all the names come from.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that's good marketing. Nobody says in the story Full Metal Superhero, but it's a good series name.
But I also have to say I love that, her name was Arsenal, and she didn't get that you didn't sort of like give her some like flying metal chick, lady princess flying
Iron Maiden.
Yeah, she's a woman superhero who just managed to have like a really cool name, that you would give to a male superhero without thinking.
Despite what The Simpsons would have you believe, not everybody who read comics was an overweight, sexist, misogynist pig.
Hey, I'm married to one who spent much of his childhood reading, and he's not. So I know.
Yeah. So I love superheroes of all stripes. I learned to read on Amazing Spider-Man. I was a kid in Oregon, and they didn't have preschool there when I was there, and so I was too young to start first grade, and so I had to wait a while to start. And I would go to the store with my parents, and I was 6 years old, and they'd have the spinner racks of comics they don't have anymore. And back then, I say back then, it was 1979. Comics were 35 cents, and so I'd pick up comics and I'd look at them. I didn't know how to read them, but I wanted to know how to read them, and so I spent a lot of time teaching myself to read just by looking at Spider-Man and trying to say what he was saying, and consequently, Amazing Spider-Man is he's my superhero, and he's my biggest influence in my life, really. Not just my writing. Yeah, right. Peter Parker. I mean, you can't do much better than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the book series, I really like it because it does feel like a comic book. You know, it has a lot of action and such. And I think it's interesting that you said that you used to want to be a pilot, because I noticed you're very descriptive about the experience of her flying and, like, you know, the different maneuvers she makes when she's flying and stuff. So it's interesting that you say that, because I'm like, wow, he knows a lot about how airplanes fly.
He knows what he's talking about.
I'm reading book 2 right now, and she's flying, and it was talking about how dry the air is, so it wouldn't leave any contrails or whatever in the air and such. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. So
there's two kinds of science you can do. You know, I mean, there's you can make up a fictional science for your universe, and then you could just do whatever you want, right? Or you can base and this can be fantasy or science fiction, you can base your science in reality. But if you choose to base your science in reality, the further those little details that you get wrong, the less people will consciously believe what is going on. And so, though there's lots of stuff that happens, especially in the later books, that I would deem super science, there's a kernel of truth in almost everything. So when I'm doing little things like she's flying through the air, or when she's talking about scientific principles, those should all be spot on. Those smarter people than me may say, no, you got all that wrong.
How difficult do you find it to, because you have to balance you've got to get the science of it right, but also you need to explain it to people who are reading it who may not have the base level of knowledge you have. So you have to explain it. How hard is it to get that description in there and the explanations in there and make it make sense while still be entertaining and not taking them out of the story by making it start to feel kind of like, okay, now I got to go look online and study this, you know, instead of, you know, taking them out of the story and distracting. How hard is that to accomplish for you?
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. There's things that I really, really enjoy, like Mark said, flying. I mean, I wanted to be a pilot. I was in the Army for a long time, and I didn't fly or anything. I was just a grunt. But I love military stuff, and I love the superhero and the science part of it. So to me, I have to remind myself that the cardinal rule is give them the barest amount possible that they need to know, while giving them a little bit of detail so they feel like they learned something. That's really important to me. When things happen to Amelia and there's a scientific reason for it, it isn't just an explosion, it is a 13 kiloton explosion. It isn't just an energy transfer, it's a kinetic energy transfer, or it's a electron energy transfer. And it's sort of like I don't have to explain to you what a kinetic energy transfer is, because everybody knows what kinetic energy is, but it sounds scientific. And the way her shields work and the way her technology works, I explain it a little bit as she uses it and as I feel like you need to do it. And I learned this actually not from writing. I learned it from playing role-playing games for so long as the DM, is when you're I don't know if you two have a lot of experience playing RPGs, but
a little bit.
You sound like you do, but I didn't want to presume. And you know, when your DM is running the game, and I was always the DM because I would let other people DM and I wouldn't have very much fun. So I was like, no, let me DM. And everybody would have a great time. And the way you would know it is that you'd be talking about something and you would start to see people's eyes glass over. Yeah. And you'd like, I've gone too far. Time for something to blow up. And and so years of that it's funny because years of that kind of taught me how to have a scene, have exposition, but not too much. Have a scene, have explanation, but not too much. Because, the cardinal sin is the info dump, right? You don't want to, Amelia gets punched by a white rhino in the first book. Now let me spend 10 pages explaining to you how her armor absorbed all that energy. No, it's not. That's you don't need to know that right now. You need to know that she has kinetic shields that are based on kinetic manipulators, and she has an AI that helps her. And then I unpack all of that throughout the whole book, because every piece of technology that she has, like a lot of times in real life, is all based on one advance. So everything that has to do with her suit, everything that has to do with her weapons, it's all based on one advance, which is her kinetic manipulators. So I explained one thing, and then everything is explained.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, I think you do a good job with it, because I really like how throughout the story, especially in the first book, where she's like, oh, this messed up, I should do this upgrade now to help fix for this situation. And so she's constantly tinkering and evolving her suit and such, which you don't see very often in superheroes, because a lot of times it just boom, we got our powers and that's it,
But I like that. I like when the superheroes, honestly, their main huge ability is their brain, that they're smart enough to adapt and keep adapting and keep learning and be a step ahead because of that. I like that.
Well, if I asked you what Superman's greatest powers would be, you'd probably say something like his invulnerability or his speed or his heat vision, because Superman has a lot of powers. And if I asked you, what Batman's superpowers are, not that he has any,
he's rich,
but it would be that he's rich. I did like that movie, by the way, just FYI, I'm going to get that out there. But if we go to Spider-Man, his greatest power isn't his strength or his speed or even his intellect. It is his unwavering desire to, no matter what, do the right thing.
Yes.
And not stop until it gets done. Did you guys see Spider-Man Homecoming?
No, not yet.
No, not yet.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, we're going to pause the podcast. You're going to go watch it. And you're going to come back.
But I have voice. I like a good, I guess, white hat superhero. I like they're going to do the right thing.
Yeah. And Spidey is the best example of it, because everybody knows with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
And because everybody knows it, when you're writing something like that, you can't necessarily say it anymore. Mm-hmm. They said it in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies so much that they didn't want to say it in the new one, and they didn't. But every scene in that movie that has Peter Parker make a decision, that phrase is implicit in it. Mm-hmm. Every decision. He has to choose between what he wants and what he needs. Mm-hmm. And the fact that Peter, no matter what, no matter how beat up he gets and no matter how hurt he gets, he chooses to do the right thing, regardless of the consequences, that is his greatest power. And for Amelia, that's what I wanted. I wanted a superhero who, when you looked at her, you didn't see her suit of armor, you didn't see her technology or her money or her unbelievable superpowers. You saw a girl who was going to get her parents back, and she was going to make the people who took them pay, no matter what.
Now, her character, I don't think we've mentioned it yet, she's actually disabled. Mm-hmm. She can't walk. How much research did you do about that situation?
And how'd you come about that decision that was an important aspect of the character?
Well, let me take it in reverse order. I'll answer Julie's question first, because she's got a better voice than you, Marx.
Why, thank you.
So when I first wrote Amelia, when I did the first draft, she wasn't actually disabled. And so as I was writing it, I felt like there was something missing from the story. Not that being disabled or having any kind of difference or otherness about you is a story per se, but I wanted to add depth to the character by removing things from her. Mm-hmm. That's why a lot of times you see characters in fiction are they have no parents, or they had a hard life. Things were taken from them, and because that makes characters more interesting. And I am not someone who likes to look around and say, well, what has everybody else done? I'm just going to do that. Mm-hmm. I don't believe in originality. I don't think there is such a thing as original. I think the only thing original about you as a writer is your voice. Everything else is something that's been done. There's a verse in the Bible that says, there's nothing new under the sun, and that was written 2,400 years ago, So I looked around and I said, okay, what have we done here? So there aren't a lot of superhero prose books, first of all. I don't know if you guys have looked at the genre on Amazon, but there just isn't. There aren't a lot, and they kind of fall into two categories. And one of those categories is the ones that take them serious, and one of those categories is the ones that don't. And we won't talk about the ones that don't, because they don't sell very well. But the ones that do take them serious, they kind of fall into two sections: male protagonists or female protagonists, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to use the word strong female protagonist, because we don't say strong male protagonist, right?
Yes, that's. I'm not going to go into that. That's a huge pet peeve of mine.
Right, I could talk about that a lot.
We should just have a special on that. You and I'll just get together and.
Not that anything I write is politically motivated, because it isn't. This is just the way I see the world. Mm-hmm. You have protagonists. Some of them are women, and some of them are men. And there is a way you write a protagonist. And while everybody, only a blind fool would think there's nothing different between men and women, there isn't anything different between protagonists. Protagonists have to have certain abilities. They have to have certain things that happen to them. Mm-hmm. And they have to have certain ways they deal with it. We don't write about cowards because nobody likes cowards.
Right.
Even if it's completely understandable, even if they're in the middle of a horrible war and you understand why they act the way they act, you still don't like them.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of approached Amelia is okay, how can I make Amelia different? How can I take things away from her? And I was looking at the genre as a whole, and one of my favorite superhero books is Wearing the Cape by Marion G. Harmon. And it is the standard Supergirl superhero. There's you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with waifu. There's a tiny girl. She's imbued with incredible powers, Superman-like powers. Tell a story. Okay, it's great. I love it. She's awesome. I like the character a lot. She's peppy, and she's my kind of character in the sense that she's like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She's she's very. I'm going to ask questions and you're going to give me answers. And then the other ones are the male heroes. And believe it or not, which this totally surprised me, is when you look at the male heroes, there are no Superman books, or very few, I should say. There's a couple. But the ones that do well, most of the male heroes are armored heroes or inventors of some kind. And so I realized, I was thinking like, okay, so what are the things that we don't like? And I'm sorry if this is taking so long, but one of the things that I don't like is let me give a character an attribute and then focus the entire story around the fact that they have an attribute that they can't control.
Right. That's not life.
Right. That's not life. I mean, if everything great about you is the color of your hair or your height, then that's not anything you had anything to do with.
Right.
And superpowers are kind of like that. You get the luck of the draw. Okay, you're indestructible and you can fly and you have heat vision. Awesome for you. But Amelia, she built her powers. And so that means she's smart. And her smart is not a superpower. It is something in the first book, she even tells Kate Petronelli, her best friend, I didn't do anything any other engineer couldn't do. I just did it 6 times faster. So automatically, instead of having the male superheroes who are the armored builders and the girl superheroes who just happen to have super, powerful powers, I wanted her to be someone who was smart and clever and oblivious in some ways to a lot of things, as often people are in the real world.
Yeah.
You're really great at one thing and just terrible at another. That's my wife. I'm awful at certain things. So that's where I came up with it. There were no armored superheroes that were female. And I didn't want to make something that somebody else had already done. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to make Amelia armored. She's going to be super smart. And then as I was working through it, I was like, okay, well, what else can I take away from her? And as I came up with her origin, and, spoiler alert, she's in a car accident when she's 6. And her back is broken. I thought, okay, so here's this little girl. Her back is broken. Everybody's telling her parents are dead. Everybody's telling her she'll never walk again. Everybody's telling her that her life is over. And she's going to say, no, my parents aren't dead. I will walk again. And you're all wrong, and I'm not going to give up until I have those things. And I love that. I mean, I love it. And I was like, that's where it is. And to answer Marx's question, I did a ton of research. Because I'm not a disabled person, but I don't believe you have to be something to write something. I believe you just have to be diligent and do your research and interviews. And so I did. I found people who were disabled, and I talked to them. I found a wonderful blog. I can't remember the name of the man, and I'm so sorry, buddy. But he wrote all about like the myths of being disabled, and turns out that there's no one real back injury that makes you not be able to walk. It's like 100 different back injuries. And there is no you're hurt here, you can't feel anything ever again, because apparently you can. There was this blog by this woman who was disabled, and she talked about how one of the questions she gets all the time is how come you're married? How do you have kids? How is this possible? And she's like, well, believe it or not, not being able to walk doesn't mean you can't feel anything. And so it was all really interesting. So I tried to put all of that into the first book. So there's some romance in the first book between Amelia and one of the other superheroes. His name is Major Force, and Luke. So it's all in there. And I did a ton of research because I wanted to be absolutely correct. And a couple of weeks ago, one of my people who follows me on Facebook, on my Facebook page, for my author page, sent me a message and said he gave the books to his mother as a Christmas present. She's been in a wheelchair since she was 17, and she cried reading them and said that it was so wonderful to read. And that to me, day made. I have these books have served the right purpose now.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you put that, because I feel the same way. It's like, characters are characters, but when you talk about a protagonist, it's like, it's like, well, it's a strong female. No, you should have a strong protagonist. Now,
Yes.
sometimes that protagonist is a man, sometimes it's a woman, sometimes they're healthy, sometimes they have an illness, sometimes they have a physical limitations, sometimes they have dyslexia, sometimes they have asthma. But, you should have a strong protagonist, but they're people, so they're going to have, one or other gender, or they're going to have, other foibles and issues that people have, but there should still be a strong protagonist.
Absolutely,
that's the whole
absolutely.
point.
And
Yeah.
you're strong because of the things that you overcome, not because of some imbued trait. And I know over the last few years it's been really popular to have, like, I love Gina Carano. She's awesome. I don't know if you guys know who that is, but she's a MMA star who did a couple of movies, and she's like 6 foot tall and can bench press a bus.
Yeah.
And those are really great, and I'm glad to see those. But not every woman can be that, and not every man can be that.
Right.
So here's Amelia. She's 5'6", 5'8" when she's in her armor. She's 145 pounds soaking wet, and outside of her armor, she's slightly stronger than a normal person because she has her wheels that she's moving around. Mm-hmm. She refuses to have an electric wheelchair because she likes the freedom that pushing her chair gives her. Mm-hmm. But knock her out of her chair, and the best she can do is crawl, and that does actually happen to her. Mm-hmm. But what makes her strong is her will, her desire to see it done, to get it done. Yeah. And to me, that's not something that you're just born with. That's something you have to build yourself.
It's something that develops through your life if you let it.
Yeah. And the fact that she's a woman, I read a lot. I think I mentioned that, and at a certain point, I was like, okay, I love all these characters. I love the Belgariad. I love Lord of the Rings. I love all the Star Trek novels. I have Captain Kirk all day long. But I'm getting a little tired of reading about guys. I'd like to start reading about women. Yeah. And so Katniss Everdeen is one of my favorite characters ever, because she's a lot like Amelia. Her desire to move forward and not give up. Mm-hmm. I don't know how familiar you guys are with Marvel Comics, but there's a character named Miss Marvel who's now Captain Marvel. And at one point, she had all of her memories stripped from her, and she had to find who she her traits inside, not powers that they have. And so, because I read so much, I think I can look at any character, whether it be Peter Parker or Worf or Teal'c or Katniss Everdeen or Captain Janeway, and I can see things about them, and I could be like, I want to be like that. But not everybody can, and I'm not putting down anybody who can't, because there's legitimate reasons why some people, when they look at a character, if the character isn't close enough to them, they can't really do that, and I totally understand it. But I wanted someone who maybe isn't me to read this book and think, wow, that could be me. I could do that. I'm in a wheelchair, but I could be Tony Stark. I don't have to be rich and a womanizer and an alcoholic to be a superhero.
A drunk, charismatic womanizing.
One of my author friends who also writes superhero, her name is Karen Diem, and she writes this book called Super. She said it really great. She's like, "Oh, do you like Tony Stark except for the fact that he's a drunk billionaire, womanizing billionaire? Then you're gonna love Arsenal."
I love it. That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah. The world of Arsenal feels very full of life. There's a lot of characters that appear and things that get mentioned about the world. How much of that did you do in advance, or how much of it was on the fly as you were writing the first book?
I'm a pantser. I wish I wasn't, because I want to write longer books. I want to write 100,000 word books. I want to write 150,000 word books. But most of my best ideas come when I'm writing. So I wanted to, when I was writing the book, I didn't want to spend a lot of time talking about how superpowers came along, because I think if you talk too much about how the superpowers happened, then that opens the door for people to be like, oh, that's stupid. We don't do that with Marvel movies.
Take some of the magic out of it, yeah.
Yeah, and we don't do that with DC movies because they have been around for so long that you don't question the fact that Superman is an alien from another planet. You don't question that Bruce Wayne can do what he do. You don't question that a spider bit Peter and now he's got powers, because collectively in our collective unconsciousness, that has existed since before pretty much most of us were born.
Yeah.
So if I had like an event happen, like 10 years ago, the world shuddered and all of a sudden people had superpowers. So I very carefully alluded to some event that happened a long time before in the first book. And then in the second book, I go into it a little bit more once people were bought in.
Yeah.
And it had to do with something that is actually really famous in our own history, which is Tesla. So, and of course, that ties it into science too, because Tesla was a genius and he was a scientist and an engineer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So to answer your question, I do not come up with a lot of this beforehand. Most of it's come up while I'm writing. And sometimes I'll come up with something, I'll think, hey, that's pretty cool. And then 2 chapters later, I'll be like, oh, this is better. And then I have to go back and change everything.
Yeah. Well, it works well because it has a nice flow to it. And it feels, it really does capture the comic book feel of just constant action and moving to the next thing and next thing. And that makes it an enjoyable read. So let's talk a little bit more about superhero genre, especially in books, because I've only recently, well, except for Wild Cards, I've read that off and on for a lot of years, but only last year and a half have I started really looking for novels that have original superhero stories, that aren't like media tie-ins or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it's an interesting genre. It's there aren't a lot of books, and if you look at Amazon's superhero genre category, it's a mess. It's like all over the place.
Mostly bare-chested bear shifters, and urban fantasy, because it's an easy.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, it's an easy category to hit number 1 in, because right now my 4th book, which is Alien Arsenal, is 38 in that category, even though it's ranked 6,000. If I removed every book ahead of it that wasn't a superhero book, Alien Arsenal would be 7th in the category.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, that tells you how well the category is managed.
Yeah, you said bear shift. I have only fairly recently been told about there's this whole werebear thing I did not know about.
I don't know if you guys know Lindsay Baroka or if you've ever had her on the show, and if you haven't, you should, because she's quite an amazing indie author. She's kind of an icon to indie authors. But I was talking to her, and she's like, oh, yeah, it's always a sad day when the bear shifters move in to your category. Because they will be number 5 in the whole store. And you're not beating that. You're just not going to beat it.
I just had no idea that was such a thing. I assumed, I guess, there's werewolves and where this and where that. I mean, I guess I logically figured there must be a werebear, but I didn't realize this was a thing.
Well, now now the big thing is dragon shifters.
Oh, really?
Are you serious? I'm now 2 wares behind.
Probably. Yeah. The thing is 80% of all books sold are romance books. And that is not a number you'll ever hear from traditional publishing, because essentially when indie publishing happened, all the writers over at Harlequin just jumped ship because they were being treated so badly. And so now they all write indie books, and 80% of all books bought are romance books. So you throw in paranormal romance and you get most of the categories get flooded with these amazingly talented writers who are writing fantastic stories that people want to read.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of all that, but yeah, I was gonna say, hey, I'm all for if employees are not being treated the way they ought to be, and you find a way to do it yourself, more power to you. That's for sure.
Yeah, traditional publishers are going to have to step up their game a little bit.
Oh gosh, we could do a whole show on that.
Yeah.
I feel like they are. I'm going to shout out to Bain, because the other day I'm a big fan of Honor Harrington, and I wanted to read the book again, but I don't buy paper books anymore because I grew up and I have to move every once in a while, and I don't do that anymore. I don't carry those huge boxes of books.
Yeah, we learned it was like moving a library when we moved.
Especially if you have role-playing game books. They're heavy.
Yes, right? Which don't work on the Kindle, unfortunately. But so I went to go buy Honor Harrington at Basilisk Station, which is by David Weber. It's a fantastic military sci-fi book, and it was free. And I was like, oh, go Bain, because that is an indie technique. And Bain is a family-owned publisher, and I don't think they're one of the big 5, but they're pretty big. So some of them are catching on, some of them are doing pretty good, but most of them they're just a big industry. They're slow to move, and they have the attitude of, this is the way it's always been done, so this is the way it always will be done.
There's a lot of people that have that mentality, so they're in a lot of company.
For sure.
Maybe not good company, but a lot of company.
Yeah.
Well, so talking about superhero genre, what do you feel are some conventions, tropes, traits, whatever you want to call them, that are must-haves to be superhero? Because I hear people will debate quite a bit that Buffy the Vampire Slayer should be considered a superhero. What's your feelings about that?
Oh, I love Buffy. Don't get me wrong, but no,
I
she's
never
not a
considered her
superhero.
one. We're huge Buffy fans too.
Right, and here's the thing: if I tell you the word superhero, what's the first thing you think of?
Batman.
Superman.
Batman, Superman, Spider-Man. Black Widow. You think of these characters from the movies, and what do these characters all have in common? They have superpowers for the most part, or they have something that emulates superpowers. They have costumes and they have code names. So at the bare minimum, if you're writing a superhero novel, in my opinion, and opinions do vary on this subject, believe me, if you don't have those three things, you're not writing a superhero novel. You're writing something else. And there are a lot of prose books in the superhero field where the writer didn't want to write a superhero novel because that's stupid, but he wanted the superhero crowd to read his book. And so he wrote a book about a private detective in a world with superpowers. This is not anybody in specific. I'm just making this up. But the character doesn't have superpowers. Or they write about superpowers, but nobody has code names or costumes. It is every superhero movie made before 2008. It is Green Lantern of 2011. It is people who want your money because they want you to buy their product, but they are ashamed or embarrassed to be doing it because they don't think it's serious. And if you can't treat the material serious, your readers will know that you're not treating the material serious, and they will buy your product.
Maybe I'm wrong, but according to some, because I'm no, I'm not putting Buffy down by saying, because I'm a huge Buffy fan, but things like that, because it was magic and it didn't have those other, the costumes and this. I've always considered those things to be more urban fantasy. So
it is urban fantasy, absolutely.
To me,
Buffy is urban
I've always made that distinction. I'm Dresden Files is urban fantasy. Yeah, and
superheroes do tackle similar themes. There's a lot of similar themes, but ultimately, at the end of the day, your superhero needs to be a good guy. He needs to live to the end, and he needs to wear a costume and have a code name.
Yeah,
and a lot of people will then take me to the skiff and say, oh, but what about Alan Moore's Watchmen? And I will say that there is one comic in the last 35 years that did that, and it was Watchmen. And there are no continuous runs of comic books filled with bad people wearing costumes doing bad things that you can't stand.
Yeah.
I did actually enjoy reading The Watchmen, but I enjoyed it right up until the last page. Then I hated it because my favorite character was Rorschach. And I won't spoil it for anybody, but the only good guy in the entire comic is Rorschach.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's not a superhero story. That's any story you get anywhere else in any other genre. Nihilism, the idea that nothing you do matters, that everybody is corruptible, everybody is bad. And that's just not why I read superheroes.
No, superheroes, there has to be a certain level of hope, I
yes,
think, for it to work. Because, if there's no hope, then why are you strapping on the costume and going to the trouble of the code names and doing the right? It's superheroes. They got to have hope, and in my mind, a superhero does the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing.
Yeah,
and that's regardless of the cost, and that's why they do it. They don't do it to achieve this other certain goal necessarily. They may be achieving other goals. But doing the right thing, the reason you do it is because it's the right thing.
And you can have a gamut of ranges of characters in your book. Maybe there's some superheroes earn it for the money or whatever, but your main character better be a superhero.
Some have lost the faith at some point.
But your main character better inspire. Your main character better be a superhero because that's what people are there to read. Nobody reads Spider-Man comics so they can read Black Cat for 18 pages, mope around, because she's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's like fantasy with grimdark, that Watchmen's grimdark take. Yeah.
I wonder if that's why superheroes have become so popular in recent years, is because so many people feel like they have to get the hope in fiction. Because we're not getting it anywhere else, as in as large a doses, and the way things are going, it's like we need that. You need it to survive, so this is filling a need.
Yeah, I never thought about that. Because so much fiction right now is very dark. It's the thing to be dark. except
has
for
been for
superheroes.
And I like it.
exceptions.
I like it in small doses, but I don't want everything I watch to be that. I mean, or read or anything. I mean, good God, like you mentioned, Watchmen. I remember when I watched that movie, I was like, that was good, but I don't want to see it again.
No, right?
I watched it. I was like, that was a really good movie, and it's not that I hated. I mean, I enjoyed it, and I'd recommend someone to see it, but it's not one I'm gonna go back and But however, I can watch V for Vendetta, and the final scene of watching at home on TV, when it gets to the final scene, I'm on my feet cheering.
Well, it's funny is that you say that about Watchmen, because then DC went and gave him Superman. If there was ever a character that is about hope, that is about
that's what we
inspiration,
were so confused about.
It's Superman. And then he took that character, and the whole reason, from what I've read, the whole reason he didn't finish Justice League was because Superman was going to be the villain in the movie.
Yeah.
And it was just like, no, you're not taking our $1 billion a year character and making him the villain.
Yeah.
And we
never understood that whole decision.
Yeah. And you can tell the scenes that Joss Whedon filmed in Justice League, because Superman's actually Superman. He smiles and he makes you feel good.
Yeah.
Really?
And yeah. Anyways, I digress.
He may have an invisible mustache too.
Yeah, I won't say that's a perfect movie, but I did enjoy it. So hope is a big deal. Have characters that inspire, have characters that rise above their challenges, and bring others with them. Yeah, those are all things that you need to have in your superhero novel. If you want to write a grimdark detective novel, write a grimdark detective novel. Leave superheroes out of it.
Right. You can write the hell out of an urban fantasy with grimdark.
So I mean, if you're going to write a superhero novel, it has to be a superhero. They have to have a costume. They need to have a code name. Even if they never use it, they have to have those things. Yeah. And it needs to be a world, where superheroes are real. And if you don't love superheroes, if you haven't read comics, if you're only doing it because you want to write to market, which is not a bad thing, then you better do your research, because people who read it are people who've been reading comic books their whole life.
Yeah.
And you might think you're doing something really original by having your hero actually be a bad guy. You're not.
No.
So I hope that answers your question, Marx.
Yeah. Is this subgenre superhero in novels? Do you feel this is a growing subgenre, or is it just kind of just a few outliers?
I have a lot of people telling me that it's going to explode any day now, and I just don't know. I have a friend, Jason Soprano, J.A. Soprano. He writes a lot of urban fantasy and lit RPG, and he just recently released a superhero novel called Superhuman. And I read it. It was really great. He usually routinely gets under 100 on the Amazon store when he releases a novel. He's a New York Times bestselling author. He's a USA Today bestselling author, and he's really good. And he hit 350. And he was messaging me. He's like, "Oh, superhero genre sucks." And I'm like, it's you're a much more limited audience, because not only are you looking for people who read comic books, but you're looking for people who read comic books who also want to read that in prose form.
Yeah.
And so you have a limited audience. Despite the fact that all these movies are coming out, they haven't really increased sales in comic books a whole lot. In fact, comic book sales are down more than they've ever been at Marvel, for a whole host of reasons having nothing to do with movies. But
it just strikes me there's a bit of a parallel. It's like, a superhero has to do what they do because they love it, and that's what they want to do. And it's almost like, in order to write a superhero novel, that has to be the reason that you do it.
You love it, right? Yeah. And
you have to really share that trait with your protagonist in order to just even go ahead and do it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And some genres can kind of fake a little, not a lot, mind you, because you do need to love what you write, because it comes through when you don't. But superheroes specifically, if you don't love superheroes, if you don't take them serious, if you think they're stupid, then that's going to come through in your writing. And I've read enough comics or enough superhero prose novels that you get one of two things. You get people who do that all right, but maybe they're not the strongest writers in the world. Or you get the people who don't know this, and so they're treating superhero novels like it's a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah.
And so, like, the hero will land and go, "Don't worry, Mr. Miracle will save you," and it's just like, and I'm just rolling my eyes and thinking, have you ever even read a comic?
Yeah, probably not.
So, and you also write for Kindle Worlds, I saw.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, for people who might not know what Kindle Worlds is, can you tell them a little bit about how that works and what your experience has been like?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to. There's two Kindle programs that I have been fortunate enough to be involved in. One of them is Kindle Worlds, and one of them is Kindle Scout. Kindle Scout is their program where you put up a book, and if they like it, they'll select it after a process, and you get published by Amazon, which I did. And then that opened a door for me to be involved with some of the people behind the scenes at Amazon, and because of that, I found out about Kindle Worlds, which is this awesome program where essentially they license people's worlds, and anybody can write in them. I got in on the ground floor with Jay Allen, who is a military science fiction writer, and he writes. He sold over 800,000 novels, and he was opening his Kindle Worlds to his military sci-fi universe. And so I wrote a novella, a 12,000-word novella called Retreat Hell, about a sniper in his world. And then Lindsay Buroker opened up a world for Fallen Empires, which is her best-selling military science fiction novel series. And I got to write two novellas for that one. The sequel one's a sequel to the other. So it's a lot of fun because you get to play in somebody else's world and you get paid to do it. And
That's good.
That's kind of a win-win situation. So my Fallen Empire ones are a stand for honor and a stand for freedom. And there's some romance in them because I think there should be some romance in everything. Just like there should be some action in everything and some drama. And then my Crimson World one, of course, is Retreat Hell. So Jay Allen writes Crimson Worlds and Lindsay writes Fallen Empires. But there's tons of them on there. There's the Vampire Diary one. There's the G.I. Joe one. There's
G.I. Joe one?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh.
When they first started the program, they were trying to license a lot of mainstream stuff. But I think that as a lot of times happens in a big company, somebody else came along and decided that's not what direction they wanted to go. But once you make a license deal like that, it sticks around for a while. But yeah, if you just Google Kindle Worlds, you'll go right to it, and you'll see all the different worlds. Anybody can write into it and earn a percentage of what you sell it for, and what you sell it for is how they determine it based on how long it is. So
okay, and so you get a percentage. Does the author, the creator of the actual setting, get some money too?
So let's just say you sell it for $1, you get 30 cents. The author gets 50 cents, and Amazon gets the rest.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I keep hoping they'll come to me and say, "Hey, do you want to start a Full Metal superhero universe?"
Yeah.
I'd be like, "Yeah." I'm not quite there yet, though, as a best-selling author. So I do pretty good. I'm probably, well, until my friend released his novel this month, I probably was the best-selling author in superheroes. But but that's not saying a ton. I do good. Don't get me wrong. But it's not. I'm not making six figures just yet.
Yeah. Well, someday soon, hopefully,
Yes.
or a TV series deal.
Yeah.
Or maybe Marvel will come to me and be like, "Can you save Spider-Man?" And I'll be like, "Yes, I can."
Love to.
Well, speaking of superhero stories and such, what are some of your favorite superhero stories? It could be in comic books, of course, novels. You already said Spider-Man, but what are a few others?
Well, I mean, I mentioned some of the novels I like, which is Wearing the Cape. There's one I didn't mention, which is by Peter Clines, who's a screenwriter, actually. And he did a novel series called X-Heroes, which is about superheroes after the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading that too. Right
Oh,
now.
yeah, that's great. I love that one. It's been a couple of years since I read it, but the main character's name is Saint Dragon, Saint George.
Yeah, the Mighty
Saint George the
Dragon.
The Mighty Dragon, yeah. I love that character. I really liked his earnestness, and I loved his arc. So yeah, that's a great one. His book 3 or book 4 is hilarious. It's got a Monty Python reference in it that had me rolling for days. I mentioned Wearing the Cape, and D-List Confessions of a D-List Supervillain by Jim Bainharder is a great novel. If you haven't read that one, it is hilarious, but it's serious. It's not like a parody or anything.
Right.
So if you want to read a superhero novel, put that on your list. Comic book storylines, there's a lot of them. My favorite probably is Renew Your Vows, which is a Spider-Man story. And long story short, about 10 years ago, somebody at Marvel made a horrible decision, and they erased Mary Jane and Peter Parker's relationship.
Yes.
In a storyline called One More Day.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to go there and go, "One more day of beating you in the face for doing that."
I couldn't believe it. I thought Marx was making it up, and I said, "You can't be serious when you're telling me this was happening."
they really hated their relationship. I forget the name of the editor who really was the spearheaded it, but apparently they hated it from the moment they did it. So don't ask me why they did it. Jim Shooter did it, and he's the one who had them put together, and he loved it. And then they fired Jim Shooter, and then ever since then they were trying to break him up, and then they used that Civil War as an excuse to do it. Anyways, Dan Slott, who just left writing Amazing Spider-Man, kind of blew up at a convention recently, and rightly so, because he gets asked this question probably a million times a day. And he didn't blow up in a mean way. He just was very emphatic, and he basically said they're never getting back together. It's never happening. There is no one person at Marvel who could ever make the decision to get them back together. He's like, renew your vows is the best thing you're going to get, the closest you're ever going to get. And in 5 more years, everybody working in the industry will have been introduced into comics after Peter and Mary Jane were erased. And there won't be anybody here who wants them back together.
I just don't understand.
Yeah. So Renew Your Vows is a fantastic storyline. It's a 6-issue arc with what life could have been like. I love Supergirl. My favorite incarnation of her is the New 52. Everything else in the New 52 sucked, but the Supergirl run was amazing. Let's see, I'm trying to think of any others. All the Marvel movies except for Iron Man 3. Love all the Marvel. Kind of going back to what I said earlier about if you don't love what you're doing, then you're doing it wrong. Yeah. And that was Iron Man 3. I don't know who made the decision to have the thing happen in the middle where you find out that Ben Kingsley isn't who you think he is. Yeah. But that movie, just at that point, I almost got up and walked out because they.
I mean,
I thought it
was kind of funny, but also it's like, man, if you like that villain, who I did like that villain, then that kind of is not so funny.
And he was scary. I mean, that movie lost all of its punch at that very moment because as much as I like Guy Pearce and I think he's awesome, he was not a scary villain. He was just generic villain A. So, but So I'm not a big fan of the only Batman movie I really liked was Dark Knight. I liked Begins, but I liked Dark Knight a lot. I did not like Returns. I didn't care for Batman versus Superman, and we could talk for an hour on why I didn't like it. I didn't
Your mom's named Martha too. Hey.
Well, I mean, there's a YouTube channel called His He. The guy just nailed it, and they're like, "Oh, well, what did we do wrong?" And Wonder Woman says, "Superman didn't smile. Batman killed people." I mean, nailed it right there.
Yeah.
But I did like Justice League a lot, and I loved Wonder Woman. Oh my gosh, did I love Wonder Woman?
Oh my god, I was just raving about it again the other day because I can't believe my mother has not seen this movie.
But she wasn't grim, dark.
Nope.
Character she fought for what she believed in and had hope.
That managed to be not only a superb superhero film, but it managed to be. If you've never cared for a superhero film in your life, you will love that movie.
The No Man's Land scene is the greatest example of what good writing and good directing will do for you.
Yeah.
That scene with hardly any words after it starts is just tells you the essence of who that character is and what she does, and she inspires people, and she gives you hope. And she is willing to stand there and take it, because it is the right thing to do. And like you said, Julie, earlier, because it was the right thing to do. And I just, So anyway, those are my favorite kinds of stories and my favorite comics.
And I loved how they didn't make the men stupid in order for her to be smart or them weak for her to be strong. They were all well-rounded, interesting, real human characters and yes, each one had things that were negative things about their character, but positive as well. And what was so great about her as a superhero was she inspired them to overcome their issues, to be better people. But they weren't like caricatures to begin with. They were everybody, and it touched on so much of history that I think so many young people don't even know about World War I at all. Anything. They memorize
absolutely.
A few dates for a test, and then that's about all they do. And there's no understanding of the humanity of just the human catastrophe that was.
There was a battle in World War II where 100,000 soldiers died.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a very long battle.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that general in Wonder Woman says, that's what soldiers do, they die being a soldier, I wanted to reach back in time and punch him, because that's exactly the attitude that got those 100,000 men killed in that battle in France. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's escaping me at the moment. But
yeah. I remember
anyways, so yeah.
There was, the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. I remember Young Indiana Jones, he's someplace like in Africa, and he was disgusted because like they were talking about, it was a bad battle because they had no understanding of the world war that was going on at that time. And they were like, they should have to pay in like so many goats or whatever. And first he was disgusted. He goes, they think they can pay off human lives? And the guy tells him, he goes, no, it's just the only way that they have of acknowledging that the lives cost something. But they can't imagine a battle in which more than 12 people were lost. How am I supposed to explain to him a battlefield where tens of thousands of dead people laid? I can't. He can't even comprehend that kind of carnage. So, and then that's when, like, as in exactly who's the brutal one here,
Woman strong without making the men weak. There's this author who I really like. Her name is Pipa da Costa. I've never actually heard her name spoken out loud. We've just talked on Facebook.
Is it P-I-P-P or P-I-P?
P-I-P-P-A.
Probably Pippa.
We've only spoken on Facebook a couple times. And there was this romance author who was asking for advice, saying, I don't understand it. All my female characters are really strong and all the men are really weak. I don't understand why people don't.
No, who wants a weak man?
Just like nobody likes weak women. I mean, you are making your hero strong by making her sidekicks weak. Just like when you have a villain who, to make your villain seem smart and powerful, you make your hero stupid.
No.
It doesn't work. Nobody likes that.
And not
so
only
don't do
does no one like it, but the notion that in order to have a strong woman, you have to have the men be weak. Because in comparison, that's the only way to make a woman strong is in comparison to a weak man. It is very insulting.
Yeah. It's like the trend right now, especially in comic books, is to make women very mannish. And they're saying it's because it's okay to be this or it's okay to be that. But what they don't realize they're saying is that what you're saying, the only reason Captain Marvel can be a good leader is if she's very butch and military and mannish.
She has to deny
with short hair and
femininity in order to be strong. It's like I've seen on these TV shows like Police and stuff, and they have a woman in charge and they call her Sir. I'd be like, someone call me Sir. I don't want to smack him. I'm saying, do I look like I got a penis and an Adam's apple? No. I don't. You don't have to call me Sir in order for me to know you take me seriously. You should be able to acknowledge that your superior officer is a woman, and yet still acknowledge that she's your superior officer. And the notion,
absolutely. And there's no reason that woman can't be a woman.
There's no reason to me. The idea that she can't wear a skirt and a floral print and have long hair and be called ma'am or miss and be taken seriously. Don't you think that's the problem? I agree. She happens to be kind of tomboyish and butch because that's her. That's great.
That's fine too.
She's forced into it because that's the only way she can be taken seriously. Denying femininity is the only way to be taken seriously. That to me is more insulting.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Right.
I think people should just be people, but there's a lot of writers who think, and I think there's levels of writing as you go through it. I don't mean to be crass, but there's this thing called the man with boobs, and that's like the first level of writing, where they just write their women characters like men who happen to have different genital parts. Pretty much every action hero in movies up until recently who was a woman was that way. Cold and tough and, in a very mannish way. And then you get past that, and then it's I'm going to write a female character who I'm going to show she's individual and powerful by having her sleep with everybody.
Oh yeah, that is.
And if that's your personality or whatever, and that's your choices that you make, that's up to you. But that is no more a representation of you being a strong character than you being tall,
right?
Or you having short or long hair, because those those are not attributes that make you strong or make you
Right.
weak. They're just attributes.
I was
And I
just-
feel like there's
yeah.
a concerted effort to defeminize women, and I don't know why, but because I like women.
And you know, I've said that before. I'm like, you know, I was just saying this to somebody the other day where I don't want to come across as, you know, I'm anti-sex or a prude or whatever, because I'm not. You know, if you feel, you know, like you said, if that's your personality, that's great. You should be true to yourself. But somewhere along the line, I feel like we've forgotten to tell younger women that being a feminist and being a strong woman, if you want to use that phrase, which I don't really care for, can also mean that you get to be your own gatekeeper, and it's okay to say no. You know, but the whole point is to be your own gatekeeper. Your dad isn't your gatekeeper. You know, your older brother isn't your gatekeeper. But if you want to say, hey, you know, I'm worth working for,
or your sister,
yeah,
you know,
I'm worth working for, and I'm not the type of person to be as free with affection, and my choice about who I am and who I feel is I'm worth working for. That doesn't make you an oppressed woman, you know. You know, because you know, you sometimes, you know, that bugs me.
Well, you see that every once in a while, and I think people mean well, but every once in a while when they have gay or lesbian characters, and suddenly they're just having sex left
all the
and
time,
right,
with whomever.
Becomes a primary trait of the character.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and there's a thing in fiction that you do when you're writing. Whatever trait you introduce your character with first, that is their defining trait. And so when I watch a movie or TV show or read a book, and the first thing the character's doing is something that I find morally despicable, that's their defining trait. And if it's too despicable, then they're no longer a hero to me, and I'm not interested in reading it any further.
Yeah.
So the first thing the character does, the first trait they show in the opening chapter, should be something that defines them as a character. And that's really, really important. And it's sort of like the whole first impression. The first time you meet somebody, the first thing that they do is that's who they are to you in your head.
Yeah.
But in fiction, it's even more important because you're going to be spending a lot of time with this character, and you can introduce faults later on, but the first thing, it better be good.
Yeah. That, what you said, Mark, reminded me of when we lived for a year up in Vancouver, and we saw the gay pride parade, and there are people who thought, because, you know, I'm from, you know, southwestern Indiana, and I was shocked, and I was a little offended at, you know, they had these everything was about sex and people being naked and gyrating and carrying on, and they thought it was because I was offended by I said, no, what offends me is that the pride parade, that seems to be the only way they're defining homosexuality, is just the act of sex, instead of it being, hey, we're real people. And because where I'm from, in my hometown, we have Gay Pride Week is really more of a weekend. But like it starts off generally at a church service, and the mayor, you know, he's like, I can't go to all the church. So he goes to a different church service where we celebrate Pride Sunday at church. And Gay Pride huge picnic is a family event where there's like a bouncy house, and there's face painting for kids. And it's
funny.
And it's families, and they have family-friendly drag competitions. See? And so to me, what LGBT rights was about we're just people, and we have hopes and dreams, and we fall in love, and we have families just like everybody else. Not, here I am naked and having sex. You know, because coming from where gay pride events kick off at church, you know.
Yeah, and I almost lost an eye in that parade. There's a condom like smacked me in the face.
And he has glasses, which is amazing. So he's wearing his glasses, and they're throwing condoms, and you know how it's square and it's got a sharp corners, and it got wedged. It like fell on through between his glass and his eye, and the corner like cut his eyelid.
Oh gosh, that sucks.
And so
it's a ninja trying to assassinate me with a condom.
And so, you know, people are thinking, gosh, they're just, you know how people from that part of that country are. They're all a bunch of redneck homophobes. I'm like, you don't understand. You know, I went to a church where we celebrate gay pride, but it's family events. You know, we have ministers and the mayor, and there's children everywhere, and bouncy houses and barbecue, you know. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the important thing to focus on, especially when you're writing, fiction characters, is just that your characters are believable, regardless of what their beliefs are, or regardless of what. When you start writing, there's an old saying in screenwriting that is, if you want to send a message, use Western Union. And
I like that.
The guy who said it was one of the people who founded MGM. And even though nobody knows what Western Union is anymore other than to send money, it's kind of the same thing. When you write something to send a message, all that comes through is the message, and it's just it's not good.
I as soon as I feel, and I'm that way, because as soon as I feel like something's preachy, even if I agree with the message, I'm
turn it
turned
off
completely.
Yeah,
like you lost me.
No, and so there are universal themes. If you've ever read Iliad or the Odyssey or Dante's Inferno and Beowulf and Gilgamesh, right?
Gilgamesh, yes.
Gilgamesh is the oldest piece of written fiction in the entire world. It's like 8,000 years old.
How good is it? Yeah.
And it has a theme of friendship and sacrifice and trying to make yourself better. Those are themes that endure. Themes like, whatever political flavor of the day A is, those don't endure, and they get dated really fast.
Yeah, that's true.
It'd be like if I was writing a book and I kept putting in references to MySpace. Nobody'd know what the heck I was talking about.
So I do another show called DC Action Hour with a guy named Jeff Burns, and we talk about different DC superhero shows on CW primarily. Along that line with themes, we talked about how we like Supergirl, but in season 2 they got very preachy.
Yes, they did.
And she was so unlikable. Season 1 was so good, and then season 2 I didn't care for.
Yeah. But I don't necessarily disagree with some of the messages they were saying, but it was so preachy that I'm like, well, what are you trying to accomplish here?
I just kind of felt like you could make it a drinking game at one point, except you'd be flat, down drunk by the end of the hour.
Yeah,
it all comes down to honesty, really, is what it comes down to. I love Arrow, and I had to stop watching it because...
Oh, God, yes.
There was this episode, for a reason unrelated to what you're probably thinking, but there was this episode where this vigilante was murdering people in the city. And
vigilante?
There was not Arrow, but there was some other bad guy who was murdering people in the city randomly, and he was filming it, and people were freaked out, and the city was scared, and all of a sudden there's this shopping mall, and somebody saw him, and all of a sudden all these armed citizens start pulling out guns and shooting into the shadows.
And the idiot just
and I'm like, okay, I carry a gun everywhere I go. All right, I'm ex-soldier. I go to the range a lot. I'm very much, I have responsibility to defend myself and my family. Right. I would never, ever, ever, nor do I know anybody who ever would, pull out their piece and open fire without knowing exactly what they were going to hit.
Right, and do you
remember people who carry guns do not do that.
Yeah. No, and the guy who he starts shooting up at the tops of the buildings, and he goes, I have my Second Amendment privilege. I have my rights. I'm like, I'm from a place, like, on the street I grew up in. I lost all my
respect for them.
Right. The street I grew up in, there were probably a couple of houses that didn't have guns in them. No one ever got shot. And I don't know a single person in my entire life who ever would have. Nobody does that. That's what people who only know a few people in their tight little circle in an echo chamber, and that's how they assume people who aren't like them are.
And so it's about honesty, right? I mean, they didn't tell that story honestly, and it offended me.
It was very offensive.
If you want to send a message like that, then you need to do it in a way that is honest, that when somebody who's on the other side of the aisle watches it or whatever, goes, you know what, I wouldn't do that, but I could see that happening. That's an honest story. I don't believe that, but I can understand people believing that. And so David Mamet, he's one of my heroes, and he has this great video on YouTube about his writing class, and he says that writers have a responsibility to tell the story as honestly as possible, because in doing so, they can discover something inside them, and people who read it can discover something inside them, and that's really important.
You're using fiction to tell truth.
Yeah, exactly. And I might not be the best technical writer in the world, and I certainly have my flaws, but I do try to be honest in what I'm writing and not let my own biases, even though you can't help it because nobody can. But I try really hard not to let my own biases come through. I let there's people who have different opinions in my book,
Right.
and that doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make them right. It doesn't make those opinions right. Yeah, you're not an evil, horrible person just because you don't believe what I believe.
Right.
And when you can represent that in a book, you get honesty. So
yeah. Well, and just think about the difference between that, how they handled guns there, and like on Stargate SG-1, where Jack O'Neill, Colonel Jack O'Neill, lost his son to an accident.
Mm-hmm.
You know how they handled that with raw feeling and honesty, and I didn't feel like it was pro or anti anything.
Just was.
It just was a sad tragedy that unfortunately does happen. And didn't
make Jack O'Neill bad, and didn't make his son evil. It just happened.
It happened, and it was a tragedy, and it was sad, you know. But it's a real life event for some people, and I felt like it was treated respectfully.
Yeah, and that Arrow episode, I mean, there's two different people doing it.
Yeah.
And it just was really forced.
And that's what we still make fun of that. We go, who doesn't? Nobody does that. That doesn't happen.
I wrote a big old long blog post to Stephen, not a blog post, but a Facebook post, and I tagged Stephen Amell in it, and I was like, hey, if you ever want to have an honest conversation about guns with an American, because he's Canadian,
wife is from
right?
Texas.
Yeah, but he's Canadian.
Yeah.
And no matter how conservative or liberal they might be, they're Canadian. It's a different way of life up there.
Yeah.
So
we lived for a year in Vancouver, trust me.
And I love, it's not a knock against Canadians. I'm just saying they have a different perspective on things.
You just lost all your Canadian.
No. All 5 people who have bought one of my books in Canada. This is where research comes in. You know, when people say write what you know, it's not write what you've experienced. It's write what you know and write what you've researched. I like writing characters from a diverse background, not because I'm a pro-diversity person, but just because that's how life is.
Yeah.
Fleet, one of my characters, is a speedster. His name is Tony Shaw, and he's from Boston, but his mom and dad were first-generation immigrants from China. And, there's a huge population in Boston of Chinese people, people of Chinese descent. And so to me, that's honest, My ex-Marine character, he's middle America. He's a Texas farmer or Texas rancher. Amelia's best friend, who's her name is Kate Petronelli. She's from New York. So it's like, there's all these different, huge country, and I don't think the rest of the world can understand how diverse our country is. No, because they're all diverse. Not diverse compared to us. Yeah. But I try to write characters who are honest and real, and I do that research, and I ask questions when I don't know the answers.
Well, I think a lot of Americans don't know how diverse we are.
We're a big country.
We're a lot of different cultures and almost like small sub-countries together. And that's
we are actually technically,
we
are technically 50 different countries. That's actually the original technical definition of the Constitution was that we were 50 different states. Yeah. Which means country, bound together under one treaty. But anyway, so just being honest, I guess. I'm hearing my daughter scream, so I might have to go.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I've been talking a while.
Yeah.
No, it's all right. I'm a talker. I'll just touch on real quick because I know what your next question is going to be is, what am I doing now?
That is actually what we have right here.
What are you doing?
We just scrolled down to it.
I've got a free, not a free book. Well, it's free right now. It's called Beyond the Black. It's a short story in an anthology of other authors, including M.D. Cooper, who's a big time military sci-fi guy. It's going to be on Amazon on the 14th of March, called Beyond the Black. And it's got a short story from me called The Butcher of Orsay. And it may or may not be a novel in the future. I just turned in a military science fiction book called Intruder to an Australian small publishing house called Close Up Books, and that should come out sometime in May. And Intruder is essentially a book I wrote that is about Wyatt Earp in space, but a woman.
Oh, cool! Yeah. Marx teases me about how much I love westerns.
Oh my gosh. Julie, you and I need to talk sometime. Tombstone for the win, right?
Yes, I was getting ready to say. If anyone looks at their DVD tower, they assume Tombstone says, I'm like, no, I brought that into the marriage. Tombstone is mine.
I'll be your Huckleberry.
Yes.
So you'll like Intruder. You should read it when it comes out. Her sidekick's name is Holiday. And she is she's a deputy ranger on the asteroid of Ceres, which is the largest non-planet body in the
just
in the solar
married
system.
my love of westerns with my love of science fiction. I could
Yes,
kiss
there you go. She's a gunslinger. She's a gunslinger and a pilot. So,
Yes.
and then right now, I just launched Arsenal 4, which was Alien Arsenal. I haven't started Arsenal 5. I'm actually working on my military sci-fi series I've been wanting to write for a long time, and I'm about halfway through the first book. Probably going to write that before I move on to Arsenal 5. I don't have a title for it yet, and I don't have a release date yet for it. I'm a big fan of Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, so I kind of want to go with something like the main character's name is Kitty Cross, so I kind of want to do something like Kitty Cross and the Pirates of Zuckerbar or something.
That would be so cool.
We'll see what happens. And then the only other big thing I've got coming up is in June, I'm going to be at Wizard World in Boise. So if you can come find me in Artist Alley, and I'll have signed copies of my novels and some posters and things like that.
Cool.
Very cool. Well, it's been great chatting with you.
Yeah, just
Hey,
give us a
you
call if
are
you want to
blast.
talk westerns. I
I will. I've had so much fun talking to you guys. You're my kind of people. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
Hey everybody, this is Jordan Gibson. I play Dark Star on Super Knocked Up, the web series, and you're listening to GenreTainment.
Well, thanks to Jeffrey for chatting with us. If you're looking for an original superhero book series to read, then be sure to check out his Full Metal Superhero series on Amazon. We will have all of the links mentioned on the episode in the show notes.
So that's it for today's episode of GenreTainment. Before we go, we want to remind you that you can always keep track of us by subscribing to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or by following our GenreTainment Facebook page, my Twitter account, which is @MrMarx, clicking over to GenreTainment.com, or follow all of the shows at SciFiPulseRadio.com.
We'll be back soon with all new guests from our favorite film, TV shows, novels, and web series. GenreTainment is a production of Alien Jungle Bug Productions.
Until next time.
Bad monkey.